Good afternoon. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome in the Kröller-Müller Museum. It's a great pleasure to see you all here this afternoon in the museum. A very special occasion. I'm very happy and proud to introduce you to this annual lecture by the Holt Smithson Foundation. I believe it's the first time that it's on European grounds, so we're very proud as Kröller-Müller Museum that we can host this. There's a beautiful program for today with artist Susan Philipsz. Very happy to have you here. Welcome, Susan. You get some information about the program later. First of all, I think it's maybe good to just to share a few thoughts with you about a museum within a national park like the Kröller-Müller Museum. It's a special museum, and I think what's so telling in this museum is also something that connects us very much to the topic of today, and of course the Holt Smithson Foundation. And I don't want to start talking about land art and what it all means, but just a few thoughts on this location. When I arrived here almost 2 years ago, one of the rangers of the national park took me along on a tour through the national park. And one of the things that struck me is how much wisdom there was, not within the ranger also, but that's not the kind of wisdom I'm talking about, but how much wisdom there was in the landscape, but also in the wildlife. This is different wisdom than the wisdom that we have as human beings. It's a wisdom that's old, that's rooted, that's somehow an instinct or a wisdom, maybe that's a better word, that's lost to most of us humans. And in that sense, it's very inspiring to be in this location as a museum. So the ranger at one certain point asked me, do you see any advantage as director of the Kröller-Müller Museum that the museum is within the national park? I mean, there's just landscape all around you. And I said, well, I think it adds up something for the audience that comes to our house, the way they experience the art, but also I think it comes very close to the intention of many of the artists that we show in our collection or that we have in our collection. For example, an artist like Robert Smithson, sorry. And that's the fact that, in a sense, many of these artists, of these land art artists, tap into this old wisdom and try to, I think, make us aware that there is much more than just human existence that governs this world, and that there is something to be learned, and there is something to make us feel humble if we connect to this old wisdom of nature and of wildlife. So I hope that today will bring us new insights, give us ideas about memory, maybe how we can get back to touching on this old wisdom. So I wish you a wonderful afternoon here in the Kröller-Müller Museum, and I would like to say thank to the Holt Smithson Foundation, but also to the Dutch Foundation Land Art Lives, who is co-hosting this afternoon, for joining up together with us here in the museum. Good afternoon. Thank you. And I would like to introduce Anne Reinders. She is of the Land Art Lives Foundation, and she will guide you through this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Benno, for welcoming Land Art Lives here today, and also thank you, Holt Smithson Foundation. And also thanks to the wonderful team at Kröller-Müller Museum for working with us to make this lecture possible. Lisa, I want to thank you already now for inviting Land Art Lives to be your partner for this annual lecture series in the Netherlands. We feel truly honored and grateful, and working with you is always inspiring and such a pleasure. Let me just say a few words about the program Land Art Lives. Land Art Lives is a dynamic international program organized by Jij bent M in Almere together with Land Art Flevoland, Martine van Kampen is here, and many other partners in the Netherlands and abroad. Through lectures, expert meetings, conference, tours, expeditions, and presentations of contemporary art, we explore what working with the land and nature means for us today. Flevoland, with its unique and international renowned collection of land art, is the natural home and central hub for Land Art Lives. Our program, however, takes place on various locations in the Netherlands and abroad. The program looks at how this art form, grounded in a rich history, continues to evolve and respond to urgent ecological and social questions of our time. Land Art Lives invites us to look beyond the idea of monumental works in the landscape, and instead to experience land art as a living dialogue between people, art, and the environment. And maybe also the animal wisdom that you were talking about. We all welcome you to have a look at our website, Land Art Lives, and join in on our activities. With this year's Holt Smithson Foundation annual lecture, given by the Scottish artist Susan Philipsz, which has roots in the Netherlands, we heard. We are very curious to hear how she, as an artist working with sound, opens up landscapes, shapes them, and makes them come alive in new and unexpected ways. I'm looking forward to hearing more about this in your lecture, Susan. And now it's my great pleasure, or maybe I say something about the program. I will introduce Lisa. After that, Susan will give her lecture, and after that, a conversation between Lisa Lefevre of the Holt Smithson Foundation and Susan Philipsz will follow, and there's also time for questions from the audience. So I will now hand over to Executive Director of the Holt Smithson Foundation, Lisa Lefevre.
Thank you so much, Anna, and thank you so much, Benno. It's always strange with talks. There's always introductions and introductions and introductions. And I always think that this is where we kind of settle into our seats so that we're ready to listen to the person we've really come here to hear, which is the artist Susan Philipsz. But I will keep your patience for a little bit longer. So Holt Smithson Foundation is an organization that's dedicated to the creative legacy of two artists, Nancy Holt and Robert Smithson. And these are artists who really rethought what art could be and where it could be found. And every year, well, I say every year, for the last 4 years, we've presented what we very grandly call the annual Holt Smithson Foundation Lecture. It's a 10-year program, and every year it takes place in a different location that's resonant with their artistic practices. Now, Robert Smithson was fascinated by the Netherlands. He really found it incredible that this place, your home, is a place where you can see geological history and human history with your own eyes every single day. He was really fascinated by the constructed landscape that you have here. So it's long been a dream of mine, and I'm going to share a secret with you here, that we would work with an institution in the Netherlands. And as I've already admitted this morning, the Kröller-Müller Museum is not just my favorite museum in the Netherlands, not just my favorite museum in Europe. It is my favorite museum, end of sentence. I love it here. And I love it here because this is a place where you can see that art is alive and full of enthusiasm. And for me, this dialogue that Benno talked about art being a part of life, is so important. And what we do with every one of these Holt Smithson Foundation annual lectures is we really think, how can we demonstrate to people that art matters so much? Because we fundamentally believe in that. And we really wanted to work not only with the Kröller-Müller Museum, but also with Land Art Lives. Now, I always insist on saying Land Art Lives instead of Land Art Lives, because I feel like I'm holding a placard, making a protest. The art lives. It breathes with us. It's a part of every aspect of how we attempt and how we often fail to find our place on the surface of our planet. So really, there could be no better artist to join with us today than Susan Philipsz. And if you could see my notes, I always put down these notes because, as you can tell, I like to talk. It's to try and reduce what I say. And it basically says, Susan, an amazing artist. So really, that's all I want to say. But I guess I have to qualify that. Susan is an artist who, for me, really invites us to engage with perceptions. To experience one of her works is to really feel the power of art to recalibrate every single perception that you thought you had. And for me, and Susan, you must correct me if I'm getting this completely wrong, for me, Susan's work is an artwork that persists. So you hear it, you spend time with it, but then it lodges yourself within your memory. It stays with you. And here at the Kröller-Müller Museum, she has a work out in the gardens, The Wind Rose, from 2019. And every time I come here, and I try and come here as much as I can, every experience is new. The weather changes, the landscape changes, and it really becomes this living artwork. And for me, Susan's artistic practice is all about this pushing, evoking, demanding that art matters. And it's not just through her own work, it's the ways in which she works with students. So Susan is Professor of Fine Arts at the Art Academy in Dresden. And the way that she teaches is also about bringing her students and showing them the power of art being in and of the world. And it is the most enormous honor, Susan, that you said yes to our invitation. And Susan's going to talk and take us through some of her ideas. And then we will be briefly in conversation. You're very lucky. I'm losing my voice, so I will not talk that much today. And we'd really love everyone to join in this conversation, because to follow through the way I understand Susan's work, art is not a unidirectional monologue. It's a multi-channel dialogue where there's so many different positions to bring together. So please join me in welcoming Susan. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much for that beautiful introduction, Lisa. It's so nice to be back here. And thank you, Kröller-Müller, for having me. It's really a wonderful experience to be back in the museum, but also in the gardens and yeah. So I work primarily with sound, but I've always been interested in the emotive and the psychological effects of sound and how sound can define architecture, define space. So I've always been interested in that from the very beginning. And I'm interested in how sound can heighten your sense of self while making you aware of your environment. And I think that's something that Nancy Holt and I would have in common, because I think that's what her work does too. And so I'm going to start with the first slide. So here I am in Utah, and this is I'm standing in one of the sun tunnels, Nancy Holt's sun tunnels. And I'd been invited to Powder Mountain to install a permanent sound installation there. And one of the reasons I said yes was because I knew that I could visit the sun tunnels and the spiral jetty. And I think that's why they've started to commission public art there, because of the the Nancy Holt and the Robert Smithson works that are very close, but relatively close by. So we set off on this journey to the Great Salt Basin, where the sun tunnels are located. And it was quite a journey. On the way, we go through past where the Enola Gay is and the Vendover, and we stayed the night in a casino. And but I have to say, it wasn't easy to find. It was really quite frustrating in the end. You have these undulating hills, and you couldn't really see anything in the landscape that could have been the sun tunnels. I thought, where are they? So finally, there was something off in the distance. We thought, is that it? And and as we got closer, we saw that it was, but it looked very unimpressive from a distance. They looked like industrial pipes from a distance. Really, I mean, I was a little bit disappointed. And as I said, it took a long time for us to get there, and there were no signs, which is deliberate. Of course, there's no signs. So we park the car and we walk towards the sun tunnels. My husband and I, Owen, who's here, and he let me go on ahead just to have an experience on my own. And then something extraordinary happened. I started to have this overwhelming emotion as I approached the sun tunnels, and I couldn't really explain what was going on. I mean, I really tears came to my eyes, and it was just something about the sun tunnels. They had such presence, such reason for being in the way they were positioned, and they went from just being what looked like some industrial pipes to this beautiful work that had so much gravitas, so much purpose. And so then I had a moment just being there, standing amongst the tunnels, which are positioned in this kind of X formation. And then finally I investigated the inside of the tunnel. So I don't look like I'd just been crying, but I was very emotional. So so this is me approaching the sun tunnels. And, the first thing I would do often is, if I'm exploring space, is to project my voice into the space just to see what the acoustics are like. And that's what I did in this case. I projected my voice, and I've worked a lot with these circular objects or spaces, and they do create a kind of an interesting acoustic because the sound comes back round on itself. So I stood in the tunnels and was projecting my voice to explore the acoustics of the tunnel. But I was really struck by how it does really frame the landscape. And you have this feeling of something that I'd read that Nancy Holt felt when she first experienced the landscape herself. She had this feeling of it being, couldn't differentiate between her inner landscape and her outer landscape. They became identical, and it was this feeling, it was overwhelming her, and she couldn't sleep for days. And I can understand what she meant when I was there. I could feel that, this incredible landscape being framed by these locators, these wonderful sun tunnels. And they also have these holes in the sun tunnels, which are they're constellations, star constellations that she's looked at. So the sun streams through, and the sun tunnels are called that because they're in alignment with the sun during the summer and winter solstice. So this now is me in another desert, 20 years previously, a desert in Texas. I was invited to Texas, to San Antonio, to do a residency, And I was really excited. I'd never been to Texas before. And for me, Texas equals desert. So I had this in my mind what I would do when I got there. I would go and find a location in the desert where I would leave this voice playing out into nothing. A song in the desert. This is what I wanted to do. And I made this work called Sunset Song. And so this photograph that you see is me on the way to Marfa. It was a very long road trip from San Antonio to Marfa, where the Donald Judd Foundation is. And we stopped and I took some photographs of potential sites for my work. But first of all, we installed the work on the rooftop of Art Pace Foundation. And I wanted this work to be powered by the sun. And I wanted it also to fade with the setting of the sun. So I had to investigate how to do that. And in collaboration with a scientist from there, we devised what would you call it? An eye, a sort of that made it as the sun set, as the sun faded, the sound would diminish to almost a whisper. And we had these two big solar panels you can see them on the roof terrace with these horn speakers. And I looked at a song from, it's an old American murder ballad, and I discovered that there are different versions of it. There's one from the male and one from the female perspective, and both are about murdering their lovers. The female stabs her lover, and the man, he drowns his lover. And so I've arranged it in a kind of call and response duet. And as the sun fades, the sound gets quieter and quieter. And so we had I'll just play it because you'll hear it on the roof. I asked my love to take a walk just a little ways with me. And as we walked, then we would talk all about our wedding day. Darling, say that you'll be mine. In our home, we'll happy be. Down beside where the waters flow, on the banks of the Ohio. I held a knife, I took a knife against his breast, her pretty hand, as in I led her down to my arms he pressed, the banks of sand. He cried, my love, don't you murder me, where she would drown. I'm not prepared, I watched her for eternity. She floated down. Darling, say that you'll be mine. In our home, we'll happy be. Down beside where the waters flow, on the banks of the Ohio. Returning home, I wandered home between 12 and 1. Between 12 and 1, thinking love. I cried, my God, what I did I've done. I killed the girl, I've killed the man. I love you, see, that I loved you, see, because he would not marry me,
Darling, say that you'll be mine. In our home, we'll happy be. Down beside where the waters flow, on the banks of the Ohio.
So the date was set to bring the work out to the desert. We'd hired the truck. There were a bunch of people to help. And for whatever reason, it didn't happen. The driver was sick. There was this other book fair going on at the same time. So there was all these reasons for it not to happen. And Riley, the head of the Art Pace installation team, he said he didn't think that it would have survived longer than 2 days out in the desert because people would have stolen the equipment. Anyway, so don't be too disappointed. So I was disappointed, though, because that was the whole thing. I wanted it just to be this voice singing out in the desert, powered by the sun, and whether someone was there or not to hear it, and then make a film of it in the desert. That was the idea. But it was very interesting to hear it on the roof terrace and to see how the sound ricocheted with the neighbouring buildings and to watch the passers-by, because the sound seemed to come out of the sky. So it worked. And then in the end, I have shown it in several roof terraces at the Carnegie and in Chicago, so different places. So in the end, it was a compromised situation, but something good came out of it. So I continued to work with solar power in this work called The Distant Sound, which was a work I did in Scandinavia. I was invited to make a work that would connect all three countries, Denmark, Sweden and Norway, which was a huge brief, So I went on this another road trip for them to take me to all the different people who were involved in the project, the 9 different locations. And it was, again, a snow blizzard. And I was looking out of the window into the sea, and I could see that there were all these broken pieces of land that out on the water. And it seemed to be the main thing that all these places had in common, these kind of fragments of that had broken off from the mainland and these little islands. And so I was imagining sound coming from these islands, but then I thought, well, that's impossible. They're so remote, and how could you power them, and so on. But it was only when we got to Grimeton, this UNESCO World Heritage Centre, which was one of the partners of the project. Grimeton's a radio station, a long-wave radio station, and mainly for radio waves that go in the water, long wave, for the Navy and so on. And so I thought, well, this is fantastic. This could be the heart of the project. I could transmit the work to these little islands. And so while I was there, I asked if this could be possible. And they said yes. And I think they loved the idea of being the heart of the project. And all the other 9 locations would be like the pulse. And so these are all the different locations, starting from Bornholm, and then we drove all the way up. It's 600 kilometres long up to Moss. So in each location, there were 3 of these receivers, which meant there were 27 receivers in each location. And we installed the receivers, the solar panel powered receivers, on these little islands. We just rowed out there in a boat, put them on the islands. And so each of the locations had 3 different islands, so the sound would be spread out. And I've been fascinated by Marconi, the pioneer of radio, who once said when sounds are generated, they never die away completely, that the sound is kind of reverberating around the universe. I always find this very evocative, this notion. So Marconi is someone I've returned to again and again for inspiration, and I've worked a lot with radio. And I've came across this radio interval signals. Every radio station would have its own radio interval signal, and it was to determine which radio station you were tuning into between broadcasts. It was before digital radio. And so I chose these radio interval stations, signals from stations who were of the regions, Scandinavian regions, or pirate radio stations, relay stations, that were sort of based on islands, and had these very simple tunes. They're very simple, these radio interval signals, but played on horn. So when you heard them played out over this huge amount of space over the water, they evoked ship's horns or fog horns, and they were calling across to each other. And the work itself, the distance sound, of course, it's a sound that you hear from a distance, but it's also a sound, as in the Long Island sound, or the in Scandinavia you would have the Mossund or the Oresund, which means sound. So, and a sound is a body of water between two land masses. So I called it the distant sound, and as I said, it's like 600 kilometres long. It's the largest project I ever made, and it was experienced from every location at the same time on the hour. So if you were in Moss, you could hear what what people were hearing in Bornholm, and it changed each. It was a different radio interval signal every hour. And I'm just going to show you a very short video now.
Yeah. 2 minutes. 1, 2, 3. Yes, coming.
This isn't on the water, but there used to be water there. This is a stone ship. So I thought I'd include this work, The Lower World, which is on at the moment in Luxembourg, and it's in a tunnel. The Aqua Tunnel, a subterranean tunnel that runs under the length of the city of Luxembourg. And I was invited to come and have a look at this tunnel. It never been open to the public before. It's almost 1 kilometre long, and I was told that it was built as a conduit for water, and it was also used as an air raid shelter. So those were the two things that really stuck when I heard about parts of its history, what its purpose was. But it was never used, really. I mean, it's closed to the public. But as you walk through the tunnel, you become very aware of the acoustics, of your own footsteps, and it being a journey from one side to the other. And then at each point, they have the street name that you're under. They have a little plaque that says where you are in relation to the street above. So it's kind of like the underbelly of the city. So I find that very interesting, and I began to think about the siren, the mythological siren from Greek mythology, Homer's siren who lured the sailors to the rocks to their deaths, and also to the civil defence siren, which you hear every day now on the news, and various types of alarms in protests and so on, like the protests that you'd hear the car horns. And so I was listening a lot to these kind of alarms, car alarms, sirens, the civil defence sirens. And so those were the two main things that inspired The Lower World, which is the work that I made for the tunnel. And The Lower World takes its name from Homer's muses of the lower world, who are the sirens. And so I would usually often I would work with already existing compositions and take them apart and take parts out and put them back together again. So breaking them down, like the study for strings that you saw in one of the images before. It was a composition that I've broken down and pieced it back together, but it sounds broken and parts are missing. In this case, it was very different. I worked with a lot of things that I remembered from my whole life, basically, from childhood to the present day, like little refrains, fragments from things. So I suppose what I'm saying is it was my own composition that I made, all with my own voice. So I'm evoking, as you're walking through, you hear these voices calling you, and you're kind of drawn into the tunnel, and melancholy voices, distant voices that evoke the sirens, and ocean. And I've been listening to a lot of sailors' shanties with different rhythms, and then it would be quite beguiling, and then all of a sudden it would burst into this three voices together that sound more like car alarms, like danger, leave, So I think when you hear a siren, it indicates danger, and that's for both the mythological siren of Homer's Odyssey to the siren, the civil defence sirens. So the sound mainly emanated from the centre of the tunnel, and so you walk towards that, and that was at its most intense. And so you passed through that to the other side. And, you're aware that it's a journey. So I'll play a short video of that to give you a sense of what it was like. So this is a work that I'm developing at the moment. I've been working on producing these sound mirrors. So sound mirrors are these, as you can see, they were exhibited already in an exhibition in a museum in China, which is still on. And I'm making new ones made of, this time they're gold, and they're going to rotate, and they're in a museum in Japan, and I'll go there on Monday for that. So what you see is these three parabolic reflectors, and they project and they receive sound. They capture sound with the shape of these parabolic. So when you're in the space, you hear these beams of sound. Again, with my own voice, which are being projected into the parabol and then bounced back into the space. So the sound mirrors were kind of devised during the war times, and they were meant to capture sound from enemy aircrafts, and so it's a device to capture a wide range of sounds, and they can focus those sounds to a single point. So that's what I'm doing with my sound mirrors, mirrors of sound. And so they can be like integral parts of lights, that kind of beams of light. You can have these mirrors inside the light that can really focus the sound, focus the light. And here's a detail of one. And I put this in, mirrors of light, so mirrors of sound, and of course Nancy Holt's wonderful mirrors of light. And so now this is the last work that I wanted to talk about, and I thought I would include this work because it's a work that I made not in a place that was not far from here, back in 2006. And I became fascinated by the idea that you could hear the sound of the universe expanding. And that brought me to... so I wrote to the Jordale Bank Observatory and asked if I could and I told them I really wanted to hear what it sounded like. This is when I was a student, so they sent me a tape. They sent me a tape and I put it in the tape machine that pressed play, and it just sounded shh. So I was a bit disappointed. But then on the B side, they had the sound of neutron stars, which did sound interesting, and it brought me to radio, actually. So back when they were discovered in the 60s by this woman, Jocelyn Bell Brundle. Anyway, she was a recent graduate who was an assistant, and she discovered these neutron stars. She detected these radio waves, and but people believed that they were extraterrestrial life. So this was they couldn't believe why are we getting these signals from outer space, But it turned out it was from this neutron star that she detected. And so a neutron star is the stage just before the black hole. It's when a massive star, massive sun, all the fuel runs out and it implodes and becomes this very dense, dark star. And all the electrons and the protons disappear, and you just have this dense matter. And when it implodes, it spins really fast. And as it spins, it emits radio waves. So this is what the neutron star... It's also known as a pulsar. And depending on the age of the pulsar, the neutron star it can slow down to become a very evocative sound. Like it could sound almost like a heartbeat or your pulse or footsteps or different things that remind you of, or fast drums. And so I became more interested in that sound. And so I wrote to... So then when I was invited to do an exhibition here, in Nijmegen, I got in touch with the Westerbork Observatory. They have the biggest radio telescopes in Europe. And I asked them if you could train one of them onto a neutron star for me. And they agreed to do it. And the coordinates of the star, PSR B193 plus 16, was the neutron star that they trained their telescope on. And what they were able to do was transmit the sound of the star live into the gallery space that I did the exhibition with, which was amazing. And you could also tune into the star in your own home, but only for 2 days. So that was fantastic. So that happened just up the road in Westerbork. And so for me, as I said, I've always been fascinated by radio since I was a student. But these neutron stars are amazing because they were once these massive suns, these massive stars that no longer are about the light that they emit. It's about the sound that they emit. And I found that really fascinating. That's the sound. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're not allowed to leave yet, Susan. Thank you, Susan, so much for that. Do you need me? It's okay. It's fine. I'm assuming the microphone is fine. If it's not, please come and save me and help me with it. Thank you so much, Susan. That was just great. And there's many things I want to respond with. And when I was writing in my notebook, I thought I would start for a very specific reason with an anecdote that I have about your work. You finished talking about the sound mirrors, and I was thinking a lot about the ways in which you evoked Marconi, saying that sound stays forever. It reverberates and reverberates. And you started your talk by saying something extraordinary happened when you went to see Nancy Holt's sun tunnels, which, as you said, are in the Great Basin Desert in Utah in the United States. And you said that it made you burst into tears for this strange thing that everyone in this room has experienced. I will not believe you if you say you've never cried. When is it that people cry? It's usually, and I've read quite a lot about this, it's usually when your feelings exceed language. So you cry when you're happy, you cry when you're sad, you cry when you're shocked. Now I remember the very first time I came across this incredible work Susan made in Glasgow, and it was the sound of your voice under bridges in the city. And I remember this moment so much. I remember going to Glasgow to look at art and walking home after some kind of event. It was quite late, it was dark, I didn't know the city that well. I was walking through and I heard your voice in that spot, and it brought tears to my eyes. So it's this echo. So why am I telling this anecdote? It's really about memory, place, and time. And the way that you've so beautifully and generously shared your work with us, every phrase you've used are evoking this sense of memory, place, and time. And I wanted to first ask you to reflect a little bit on the third of those provocations, on time. Because if I think about the experience of the work here at the Kröller-Müller Museum, it slows you down. You stop and you spend time. Could you talk a little bit about how you bring time as a medium into your work?
Yeah, well, time and the time between are really important things in my work. The time that it might take to get to the work becomes part of the experience, and then the waiting for the work and anticipation, and then finally to hear it or to happen upon it unexpectedly. These are all things that for me is important when you engage with public space, and yeah, time is a big part of that, and. Yeah, so you're very brave to walk down Glasgow the bridges in the dark, and you still found it emotional. And yeah, so I think it's interesting that I think people who are waiting for the work or do happen upon it, they describe the exact moment in time when they hear it. You know, like I was standing under the bridge and. It started to rain, and then I heard your voice, and then it always comes back to that exact moment. You know, the weather as well. Always it comes up, funnily enough, and yeah. So it's interesting. I think when people are waiting in anticipation, their senses are heightened more, and they're become very aware of their environment, and I think that's for me interesting when I'm working in public space, that you're not completely allowed to be taken away to another time. You're become grounded in the moment. You know, you're all of a sudden hearing this disembodied voice or voices. You become very aware of who you're standing beside, whether it's the supermarket or if it's in the under the bridges, and you become so you kind of simultaneously being taken away, but also you become very rooted in the present moment. And so I find that's an interesting tension I can create there with working with public space and the people who happen upon it or come expecting to hear it and waiting, you know.
It's interesting to hear you talk about the importance of the journey to see the work. So this event, your event, Susan, is part of this bigger research program that Anna is a part of Land Art Lives, Land Art Lives. So what is land art? I mean, land art is this term that I really don't like at all, but maybe now is not the time to go into why I don't like it. But it's an art historical term. And land art kind of refers to artwork that is outside of museum spaces, that enters into a dialogue with the environment. So to go and see an artwork like Nancy Holt's Sun Tunnels, you have to make a journey. And when I think about artworks that are in public space, I always imagine that really the medium, so you know how when you see an artwork, it will say made of marble, plaster, earth. I always think when it comes to art outside of the museum, there should be journey listed within the mediums, because you have to intentionally travel to go and see it. And when we think about Nancy Holt's artwork, she often said that her work is really linked to the development of the American highway system. So this sense of travel. So when you choose to make a work, I know so often, Susan, it comes from invitation, but you don't say yes to every invitation, otherwise you wouldn't even have time to sleep, I think. What is it about a location that makes you want to say, this is the place. This is the place that I want to encourage people to travel to?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the different things, like take, for example, the train station in Kassel.
Could you maybe just describe that work a little bit for those who haven't seen it?
Okay. So I was asked to be in an exhibition called Documenta. It happens every 5 years in the city of Kassel, which is a terrible city. I mean, the good thing about Kassel is this exhibition happens there every 5 years. And I find it difficult to find a site there because it's quite an ugly city. And I hope no one's from Kassel, I'm sorry. And I almost gave up. I couldn't find anywhere until the very end. I was with Owen and we went to the train station, which had formerly been the main station, but became the end station. So I walk in and it's got kind of a melancholy vibe about it. It's not really used that much. And I was beginning to feel, oh, right, this could be something. And then I walk out to the platform's end and I'm looking out into the hills and I think, again, the distant sound, a sound from a distance. I wanted to have sound coming from far away and you're standing on the platform. So I suppose this is recurring themes of distance and separation in many of my works, but this is it. I didn't know what I would do at this point, only that I wanted to work with that space in front of me and have sound emanating from a distance. So I told the curator, Carolyn, and she said, okay. And but then I noticed that there's a plaque that describes that there had been deportations of the Jews to one of the camps was Theresienstadt. And I'd read about that in Sebalt's Austerlitz. And so I thought, okay, that's something. And so that brought me to Pavel Haas, this composer who composed Study for Strings while he was interned in Theresienstadt. So that's what I worked with. When I said earlier, I often work with compositions where I deconstruct them, take them apart, and I only used 2 voices from the entire orchestra. And so there were all these holes, these gaps, these parts missing, and then had that sound emanate from the train tracks. And those particular train tracks led to the Henschel and Sons factory where they built the Tiger 1 and Tiger 2 tanks. And, you know, it had formerly been to build the trains, but then during war they'd built the tanks there. So that's why Kassel was so heavily bombed. And that's why it was an ugly city, because of this Henschel and Sons. So to answer your question, it was the atmosphere of the train station, the fact that it was underused, and you had this incredible view of these hills and this deep space, this distance that I wanted to work with. But at that point, when I decided to work with the space, I hadn't known about Pavel Haas, or it was only later. And even then, I was thinking, oh, can I work with it now? Because it was so horrific. Some of the archival material I uncovered with all these swastikas on the platform and so on. But it's just difficult to, it was everywhere, so you couldn't avoid it. But yeah, so that was but it was more like the atmosphere and, of course, the history of the train station and Kassel itself was very interesting. Once I did the research, and it brought me to Pavel Haas, So, but that's how it started, just standing on the platform's end.
I mean, throughout your work, it's incredibly research heavy, and I want to make a provocation to you about memory. So inevitably, if someone writes on your work, they write about memory. But I want to complicate that a little bit, because I think when you make a work, you're drawing on, creating, and speculating on memory. And whenever I think about your artwork, I always have the sense that it's really embedded in histories of literature. And literature, of course, comes from very specific, embedded social structures, narratives, experiences, and also stories that may have happened or maybe should have happened or should not have happened. So I'd like to maybe ask you to talk a little bit about your interest in literature as a holder of memory.
Well, absolutely. I mean, literature has inspired me from the start. I mean, Sunset Song, I forgot to mention, what takes its name from the trilogy by Lewis Crasset Gibbon, and the Sunset Song was part of that trilogy, which is I loved the book. I love Lewis Crasset Gibbon, but I also love James Joyce. I think, as you know, and I've done quite a lot of work inspired by him and his. I mean, and I love him because he's so passionate about music and song. I mean, all of his writing is about that. Everything he wrote it comes back to that, and he was a singer himself, and so and how. In The Dead, for instance, this work that I made for 35mm film, I transposed my voice onto 35mm film, and it refers to the song that's sung in the story The Dead by James Joyce, where she hears this song and she's catapulted into another time back. A memory is evoked of a former sweetheart of hers. And he used to sing this song to her. And it's got a very tragic story, because he dies basically for her love. And so all this is the pivotal moment of the whole story, where, it's just this dinner, but then this one song just, it's all centres around that and how the song in particular has, it's very, can evoke memory.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it can also create memory as well, because when an artist adds something to the world, I always think they are creating something that never existed before, and it becomes an igniter of experience. And of course, here in the Gardens is a work that evokes new experiences. But it's also this sense, and I want to come back to Benno's very beautiful introduction, to this sense of evoking us as humans, our dialogue with other earth beings. And this phrase, earth beings, is one that I really love. And it was developed by this amazing anthropologist called Marisol de la Cadena. And she talked about how we human beings need to think about other earth beings, which could be a mountain, which could be a tract of water, which could be the wind. Could you also talk a little bit about the work that's here that we can experience?
Yeah, of course. I have a sound installation permanently installed in the woodland, the forest, and it's called the Windrose, and it takes its name from it's a compass that sailors would use out at sea, or used to, to define which direction they were going, they would use the windrows, which, I'm sure you all know what a windrose looks like. So I took the name from that. And I've recorded different conch shells from different parts of the world and had those sounds emanate from the trees. And a conch shell is often used to depict the north wind in depictions of in art and architecture. You'll see Boreas the holding a conch shell, and it's supposed to have this deep bellowing sound like the north wind. And so I've seen this come up a few times, and so that kind of brought me to the conch. And I think in the context of the forest, and of course the windrows, you're in the Netherlands, that people are very familiar with. It's a nautical reference, obviously, but in this situation, it sounds more like hunting, the sounds of horns that you might hear in the forest. And so that's what the work is. But it's a very immersive. I mean, it sort of comes from all. There's 8 points that you hear the sound, and so it comes from hidden sources in the trees.
I mean, that makes me think of two important references in terms of this sense of how Nancy Holt and Robert Smithson's work almost haunts art making of the present. When you talked, Susan, about Nancy Holt's sun tunnels, and you showed us that great footage of you walking through it, there's an incredible sonic quality when you go to see sun tunnels, because the wind comes through these tunnels and there is an echo. And Nancy Holt was so interested in this sonic quality. And she talked about this artwork as being an instrument for perceiving. Here in the Netherlands is the only extant earthwork by Robert Smithson outside of the United States, Broken Circle Spiral Hill, which is in or close to Emmen in the province of Drenthe. This is a particular artwork where Robert Smithson wanted to bring together industrial history, so it's located in a former sand mine, and also geological history, because it's where there are rocks that have been deposited by glacial movement. And Smithson was always really interested in the ways in which shells become these transmitters of the movement of sea and sea life. And he talks a lot about the ways in which the form of a shell is something that replicates the constant changing of lifespans, of life forms, and the materiality of artwork. And this sense of the spiral. Robert Smithson was really interested in the ways in which James Joyce wrote as if it was a spiral ear of thinking. And throughout your work, you keep on coming back to water. Could you say something about water, especially here in this place?
Yeah, it's true. I was thinking about that the other day. Why did I always come back to water? I mean, I've so many of my works engage with water or about water, or whether it's lowlands, the work you experienced in Glasgow, the windrows, I suppose, there's connections to water. Yeah, I mean, I think water is, it's a place that you can project across, a space like this distant sound, a body of water between two landmasses. The water, the lake in Munster, it sort of separates you. There's the other side of the water. And also in many of these songs, about drowning in water, like Sunset Song or Lowlands. So the ghost comes back. She was drowned, or he was drowned. It depends on which version you listen to. And Rosa Luxemburg, also the Anna Livia Plurabelle. It's all water, but it's. Yeah, I think just there's so many interesting stories and songs that are kind of engaging with water, and these murder ballads, or the two sisters where she drowns her sister, and so these are all things that I've come across in my research that all kind of come back to water, and I did ask myself that why is that? Why are there so many songs about drowning and water and so on? But for me, it's a place to engage, or for projection and contemplation, and but also a lot of the subject matter that I've been drawn to has been about water.
And of course, water is something that links land.
That's true.
This sense that it's this linking and this movement and these connections. I'd like to see if anyone has any questions, thoughts, contestations, arguments. Even I can see a hand up just towards the back, and if you can just wait for Lot with the microphone as we're being recorded, just to make sure everyone can hear. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much, Susan, for your beautiful work. I'm wondering if you could elaborate a bit more on the work you have here, the windrows, because you were talking, the lady next to you, about earth beings, and I'm wondering whether you are actually interacting with, talking to, or converse with the trees and all the other beings that are in that particular place where you put it, this windrows, and also maybe that you can hear how they are receiving your work. I'm wondering whether you could elaborate a bit on that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, I think it's important to leave a lot of silence between, and leave space to also hear the sounds of nature, the wind rustling through the trees, to hear the birds. So all those sounds become part of the experience too, and to leave enough pauses so that you hear, you also experience that. I think it's so when I'm working in a quiet space like that, I'm very aware that I want it to be in unison with it. I want it to be to make sure that these other sounds that make it so special, the forest so special, that comes through as well. And more the windrows, more I couldn't really. Well, the windrows it's something that I've been sort of fascinated by, the idea that the wind, is, in also in literature, it's something that is often written about, and you can have this different names for winds, that. But in the context of this forest, it's more of a kind of a. I think what it evokes is more this feeling of these distant horns. I mean, it is, a shell is like a horn, and So to put in a setting like that, you do start to think about hunting horns and so on.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks a lot. Something I would love to hear your thoughts on is a thing that I, as someone who has a practice that's more concerned with physical objects, also very often outside, is an aspect of size. And then I thought, seeing your works, I had sort of the envy of working with sound, being able to create connections that are quite extensive and huge, so to say, and that's because you work with a different medium, the medium of sound. So I'm very interested to hear your thoughts on the aspect of volume. What does it mean what is too loud or too soft means, and also what is like the right distance to appreciate something that has so different appearances from different points of where you are experiencing it from.
Well, like for instance, in the tunnel that I showed you, there are points where it is loud, it's intense. You know, I want it to be intense, and then it changes again to being gentle and quiet, and so yeah, it depends on the work, the situation, and but generally when it's the work that's out in the public domain, it's not about being loud, it's more about being heard from a distance. I mean, it doesn't have to be like the distant sound. You could hear it from really far away, but it wasn't, because I'm using these horn speakers, which are very directional. You can hear it without being loud, and depending on the situation as well. With being radio, sometimes the reception wasn't great. You know, you could. Yeah, so it's of course something I have to always consider, even before I start to make the work. Well, who will be the people who might live in the neighbourhood? You know, like who will be experiencing it on a day-to-day. So that's something that I'm very aware of, and often more aware than the curator. Like I have to ask, well, do you know if there's anyone? You know, even if it's a sound that you wouldn't think would be so disruptive, but if you hear it all the time, it's different. You know, so this is something that I have to be very conscious of when I'm making a sound installation in public space. But usually, it's not going to be something that where there is a community living close by or anything like that. It might be out in the middle of nowhere, you know.
And volume is such a sculptural quality as well, thinking about your mention of being an artist who has a material practice.
Hi. Thank you so much, Susan, and also Lisa. I'd like to take that thought about volume a little further and ask about scale, because I think that emotive quality that you were talking about, Lisa, comes from being very personally touched in a way that much other art doesn't do, because singing is usually something we do in private, in the bathroom, or reading as well conjures a world in our heads. And yet, the jumping of scales, going to pulsars and so on, really struck me as something that is nearly an updated alchemy, as above, so below. Or so does your research stretch to alchemical literature as well?
No, it's interesting you say alchemy, because I discovered quite recently that how gold and platinum and silver are made through neutron stars colliding. And that's a kind of an alchemy. But did you know that? I didn't know that. Anyway, yeah. So, yeah, I suppose if I was to think about differences between my work and Nancy Holt's work, is, you know, when we both work with scale. And of course, a song, you know, the emotive qualities of the voice. These are things that have an emotional trigger. You know, it can be evoke memory and so on. So it's partly the landscape, so you have this experience of the distance. That's I think a thing that people got very emotional over in Documenta. Because I'm trying to work it out. Why are people so emotional with this work? Because it's not a beautiful sounding work. It's quite a kind of, it's broken down and it doesn't sound nice. I mean, it sounds, and I think it's because you hear these sounds from a distance and the sense of separation and distance, and that's the emotive part of it, you know. But of course, then in Lowlands, it is a sad lament, you know. So that has an emotional impact too. But you're also in this really rundown environment with homeless people there and all sorts of. So it's it's fighting with that, you know, and this trundling train above your head and the traffic sound. It's quite. So I'm interested in that area, you know, where you're not really allowed to just go completely to that side of the emotional part. You know, you're kind of always aware of what's around you, you know.
The question of scale, there's two really brilliant things that Robert Smithson says about scale. Firstly, he says that a grain of sand can be the size of a boulder, depending on how you look at it. So that's about perception and this activeness. And then he also says that if you have a thing and it's concerned with size, it's an object. But if you have a thing and it's concerned with scale, most likely it will be an artwork or a sculpture, because it's about that relationship and it's about this human body, these annoying things that we all have and that we live with. And perhaps that's part of this proximity that brings these visceral emotions in relation to your work, because your sounds are literally entering through our spiral ears into our complicated and difficult and impossible emotional world.
I wondered if Nancy Holt had also liked Poetics of Space, you know, Bachelard's Poetics of Space, because that was something that as a student, I loved, and intimate immensity and all these. So when I was out there in the Great Salt Basin, I did think of Bachelard, Gaston Bachelard, when I was and also inside the sun tunnel, looking out into the. I mean, you know, you feel like you're just you think about the whole universe. You know, you become very aware of just the scale, the vastness. It's the epic scale of it. It just makes you. The feeling is incredible. It's overwhelming, as Nancy Holt often said. The landscape was overwhelming. This feeling, you know, it's incredible.
And Nancy Holt does have it in her library. This book, The Poetics of Space by Gaston Bachelard. Interestingly, she has no music in her collection. She didn't listen at all. Smithson, yes, had a very big record collection.
Hi, Susan. Thank you so much. We were talking a lot about, of course, the sound, and I was wondering, what about your consideration of material? Because you were currently working on a piece where you are currently using mirrors, but now going over to utilizing gold. And it makes me also think of how acoustics also are very much determined by the materials that we use. You can see it in Holt's piece in the desert with these huge pieces of concrete. And I also wonder how your decision of what kind of materials you use are maybe impacted by how you acquire those materials as well, seeing as gold is quite a big step up of...
well, I haven't actually made something in gold. It's a gold mirror, the colour of gold. I mean, it's not made of gold, but yeah. But it's interesting.
Acoustics,
Yeah, the acoustics.
Thank you.
And yeah, thanks for the question, because it is something that I've been exploring more and more in my work, where I've been interested in objects that create their own acoustic. And I mean, before it was the acoustics of the architecture, you know, like, as I said at the start, when I go into a space, I project my voice, see what the acoustics are like. That's what I always do. But then I started thinking about objects that create acoustics, like a well or a silo or a chimney breast. So I started thinking about making objects that have their own particular acoustic. And so in more recent works, I've made these large sculptural objects that has sound emanating from within them. And so that's been, and also the sound mirrors that I showed, you know. So yeah, these are objects that are kind of about the acoustics. They have their own acoustics. And also, like, the curvature of, like, the sun tunnels, also the curvature of some of the spaces I've worked with, how they create this sort of whispering gallery. And so that's also something that I'm very interested in. And right now I have a work that is doing just that. I've created a whispering gallery. It's in a museum in China, another museum in China, and also in the tanks in London. I explored the curvature of the space where the material. But of course, that's a space in itself. It's not an object. But I have made miniature versions of that with oil drums. And it's incredible what you can do with an oil drum. The acoustics are like, it's like a cathedral. You know, you put a sound inside the oil drum, which are small objects, and it's so huge, you know, because because of its shape, you know, so it creates this amazing sound. So it's the same principle as the oil tank of the Tate Modern, the tanks, but in a miniature way. So I've been exploring lots of objects that have their own sound. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Rubia. Thank you both for this wonderful talk and also for being here, Susan. Your work is really amazing. You were just tapping in something that really reminded me of a German writer. It's called Wolfgang von Goethe. I think he said that architecture is frozen music, and that music is liquid architecture. It really reminds me a bit what you said in regards to architecture and sound and the cathedral. So how do you describe, maybe in that sense, your own work?
How do I describe mine in relation to what you said? Yeah, I think it's a beautiful. I read that. I remember. Thanks for reminding me of that. Like, it's liquid architecture. Yeah, and it's how I think sound can really define architecture and draw attention to it in ways that, you know, that you might not, like, especially in public space, you're not aware of a lot of the architecture you're walking through every day, maybe, and then all of a sudden the sound draws attention to this space that you'd never noticed before, or you don't really notice the people you're with, you know, you're sort of beside, or so. Yeah, I'm really interested in like in London, this song cycle for the City of London. It was in 6 different locations that all connected with each other in the city, and but it wasn't just the architecture; it was the history of these places that, you know, people would never really pay any attention to, and then by drawing attention to it, but with the sound, you know, it draws attention to the history of it as well, which informed the work. So, yeah, or the Kunsthaus Bregenz, which is a Peter Zumthor, the architect Peter Zumthor is my favourite architect. He came to my show. He loved the show because it does really draw attention to his wonderful architecture and the acoustics of the architecture. I really worked with that museum in particular. Has very it's very resonant. It has a really long reverberation time, which can be very challenging. And I made that part of the work, that that connect the acoustics are connected all of the 4 floors of the museum, particularly in the staircase. So, acoustics in these concrete architecture can be problematic. You know what it's like. It can be very challenging for sound, but I like to make it work for me, than against, But a lot of museums aren't really thinking about sound when they were built. They were kind of just, So I've just thought, well, there's no other way to do it. It has to engage with the acoustics or the.
Yeah. I wanted to say thanks, Lisa, for pointing out how you said art is life, full of enthusiasm and full of life. And then I was wondering, Susan, your origins from Scotland, yeah, and then also talking about contemplation and the vastness of how far you are from a work and how the proximity you have. So maybe also, can you say something how your daily life is related to this kind of connection with nature and emotions, and how that's then merged into art? Because I think art and life are so connected.
Is that for me?
Yeah, Susan. Because of the landscape in Scotland is so vast as well.
Oh, it's amazing.
And the sea and the ocean, how that
it's
endlessness is inspiring.
Endlessness. That's a good word. Yeah, endlessness. James Joyce. I mean, Scotland is in my heart, but it's not really a place I get back to very often. I'm in Berlin. I live there, and that's flat. It's it's not unlike in the Netherlands. The landscape is flat. When I think of Scotland, it's the mountains and the sea, and it's very. We don't have any sea in Berlin. It's very far. So I do miss that. I especially as I said that. Water has been such a huge theme in many of my works. So maybe it's because I'm yearning for the sea. But it's also about tears, and Scotland is full of, not just Scotland, but a lot of these laments there's, whether it's John Dowland's Lacrimae to the Lowlands sailors' chant. It's funny because this actually it kind of connects Lowlands, the work that Lisa loves, that she encountered in Glasgow, was originally a ballad. From Scotland, from the 16th century, and it became adopted by the sailors, and it became a sea shanty. And so when I first heard it, I thought they were clearly singing about lowlands of Scotland, but they're not. They're singing about the lowlands of the Netherlands. That's what the song is about, and being drowned in the windy lowlands. I just thought, well, how can you drown in the lowlands? That didn't make any sense until I did my research and discovered that it's about the lowlands of the Netherlands. I never even thought of that until you asked me that question. Yeah.
I love that. I think, look, you've got one more. I
think we're kind of running out of time.
Okay, one more, and then we will stop.
Hello, Susan. During your talk, I was struck by the word water. You mentioned it recently. I'm not that familiar with your work, but did you do a piece about water and your voice? Or could you, please?
Well, thank you for asking if I could, but I have. I've engaged water. In fact, right now I'm in conversation with the Basque Museum about relocating a work that was made to be, it was installed over this water place in their museum. I don't know, what would you call it? A water court. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they're asking if it could be recited It's in a different museum. So anyway, so I'm talking to them about reciting it, and does it have to be across the water? So I said, well, I think it's enough that you have the ocean as the background, and we have this incredible ocean, and it doesn't have to be crossing the water. So I have done a lot of work that has engaged with the theme of water and tears, and this has definitely been a recurring theme in my work, and I mean from the beginning. And it's funny you ask about it, because it is something that I'm in conversation with right now with the Basque Museum about reinstalling it over water.
And I think that's a really kind of evocative place for us to pause, because water is something that takes things elsewhere and brings them back, just like sound. And maybe this comes back to this sense of the importance of art being something that surrounds us. And that's its incredible power. So I'd like to really thank you, Susan, for today. But to close, I'll pass to Benno. And thank you, Benno, for inviting us to think together here in your wonderful museum.
Thank you, Lisa Lefevre from the Holt Smithson Foundation, very much for hosting this wonderful afternoon here. And of course, Susan Philipsz. I heard many things that I'm sure will resonate with my thoughts the coming days, probably weeks and even months. And I want to close with two thoughts from a very museum perspective point of view. In a museum, works of art come together, and they're chosen often by the museum, by the curators, by the director to form a collection. And Susan, I just want to stress that from now on, you're part of an edition of 10 annual lectures, one of the artists that is part of that. So you part of a small collection in the future. You're also a part of the collection of this museum, which brings your work in connection with many other works. And I think that's a beautiful thought to end this afternoon with. We're here together with people that are interested in your work, in land art, I guess, maybe even in the Kröller-Müller Museum. There is a small drink at the bar until 4:45. The museum is open until 5. The garden is open only to 4:30. So if anybody still wants to hear the windrows, just rush over quickly, and then you have still 15 minutes after for a drink. Thank you very much for coming here, and enjoy the afternoon. Thank you very much.